Hey, college wrestling fans, it's JT1Wrestle here, and we have got a great interview today. Please welcome to the show the head coach of Otterbein, Brent Rastetter.
Thanks, Steve. And I appreciate the invite to come on and look forward to talking to you.
Well, coach, my first question for you is about one of your best wrestlers last year, Cal Callahan. He had a great season last year, took seventh at the prestigious Pete Wilson Invitational, uh, making the regional four finals, and he qualified for the NCAA Division III championships. Talk about Callahan and the leadership that he brought to the program.
Yeah, he's really kind of a great story. He actually started wrestling in my club team, drove over an hour a couple times a week when he was in eighth grade to wrestle in my club team. So, he jumped on my radar, pretty early in my time here at Otterbein. And his sophomore year, he made the state tournament here in Ohio. Then at the beginning of his junior year, he was playing dodgeball in the practice room, and a heavyweight landed on his outstretched arm, and he basically took his shoulder apart, had to have reconstructive surgery on the shoulder, missed his whole junior year. His dad thanked me after the season last year because he said I was the only coach that stayed with him on that recruiting trail after the injury because he's just a great kid. Was able to finally get back on the mat the day before practices started his senior year. Ended up finishing eighth in the state of Ohio, and of course, a lot of colleges jumped back on. Were interested after he placed at state, and since we had never wavered, we were lucky enough to get him here. Had a great freshman year for us. Placed at regionals his freshman year. Second week of the season, his sophomore year, he broke his foot, was out his whole sophomore year. So, here the kid missed two, big years within both his high school and his college careers. Came back his junior year, was able to stay healthy, and lost in the go-to match at the regional. Ended up finishing fourth. Uh, Worked extremely hard during the off season. He worked at Jeff Jordan's wrestling camps all summer long. Came back, looked primed for a great senior season, and the week of the first match, I had a group of guys all test positive for mono. First time I've ever experienced that. It was going around campus. We had three starters that we lost early on, Kale being one of them, and we couldn't get Kale's spleen to shrink, and he missed the whole first semester being out with mono and did very, very little because of the situation. So we were lucky enough to get him back second semester. Had a great second semester. Just the kid has just amazing drive, amazing perseverance, and was able to place with Pete Wilson, and then made the regional finals, qualified for the NCAA tournament, won a match there. Um, just an absolutely great story. He was a great leader in the room, even when he wasn't able to wrestle. And he's going to be missed this year because he's a pretty special kid. But you always want to point to the fact that wrestling is great for teaching life lessons, and it's not always about the wins. It's about being able to overcome and persevere, and he is a prime example of that.
You guys also returned three other of your four regional place winners from last year: Luke Dolan, Logan Cormell, and Gary Steele. Dolan proved himself to be a phenomenal pinner last year. He
Yeah.
won the Gore Aaron Award at Regional 4. Talk about these guys and the goals and expectations you have for 2025, 2026.
So, we're going to be relatively, young this year. We did have a lot of freshmen that, were starting last year for us, Dolan being one of those. We did lose Steele for the first semester, this year, but we do have some young guys that I feel can step up and really contribute. Logan and Luke are going to be, two of the main focuses of the lineup. They both worked Jordan's camps all summer this past summer. So, Logan has never really done much off-season work because he's worked on a road crew during the summers during his time here, but he finally committed, placed regionals last year and just finally committed to doing some off-season stuff. And, he came back to campus, he put a lot of muscle on, and he's just got a little bit different swagger to him. Dolan is just dangerous. He had some things that he needed to clean up that I think he worked really hard at during his time, at Jordan's this past summer. So, I think they both can be in the conversation, if things fall right and they stay healthy for, making the NCAA tournament at the end of the season. But, at the Division III level, only had taken three, out of, these 2021 team regionals. It doesn't leave much room for error. So a lot of things, have to fall in your favor. But I definitely think they both will be in the conversation at the end of the season.
I'm going to switch gears on you here for just a second, Coach.
Yeah,
Otterbein has also been extremely successful in women's wrestling,
yeah.
led by former Campbellville national runner-up Leah Castro.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Cardinals last year crowned their first national champion in Olivia Shore
Yeah.
last year. Your thoughts on the women's program and their success?
So, I was lucky enough, I started the men's team here at Otterbein back in 2015. So I felt very fortunate to be able to start the women's team. They had me director of operations over both teams, but I was able to hire Chris Klein, who was a Westerville, boy. So he's right from this area. He was a state champ here at Westerville, went on to wrestle at Ohio University. He's the head women's coach, and we were very fortunate to get Layla to come in as our grad assistant, which, she's a force, in women's wrestling. And because of Layla coming in, she's had a longstanding relationship with Olivia. And, Olivia was out in McKendree, but wanted to come back home, wanted to come closer to home. And this was just a perfect opportunity. So um, last year, it, she just kind of put Otterbein women's wrestling on the map. Chris and Layla did a great job on the coaching end of it, but you're pretty lucky when you get somebody as special Olivia to come in, to help kick off the start of a program. Obviously, she won that national title. And then now what's taking place is what I call the Olivia effect. And there are a lot of extremely tough young ladies that we got in this current class. Our numbers went from 11 last year to 26 this year. And it's, we've got some wrestlers, in that group. And we had not just Olivia last year, we had three other national qualifiers that all won a match at the national tournament. Obviously they're all back. Plus we have, a number of girls that were state champions here in Ohio that are in this current recruiting class. So I think something pretty special is developing on the women's side. And I'm just looking forward to being able to stay in the background and watch things as they progress over the next few years.
Self come from a lot of years of high school coaching. You coached
Yeah,
for 12 years at Lexington High School, named conference coach of the year 8 times.
yeah.
Talk about the similarities and the differences between coaching at the high school level and then coaching at the collegiate level.
You know, that's actually a really good question because I was very fortunate during both my high school coaching stints at Ashland Crestview first and then at Lexington. We were able to have a lot of success, especially the last 10 years that I was at Lexington. We couldn't beat St. Paris Graham, Coach Jordan. Uh, there just was no way, but we were state runner-ups to them on multiple occasions and always in the conversation to be one of the top teams in the state. And a big part of what we were able to do there at Lexington, when I got there, in 30 some years of wrestling, they'd only had 5 state placers. So it was not a school that had a history of wrestling. And I got the kids to buy into the off-season program right away. And that changed everything. So during that 8-year run, we had 27 state placers. So, everything just changed for us. And it was the off-season work that those kids were willing to put in. But then I get to the college level, and with our Division III limitations, I no longer had an off season to be able to work with the guys, and we had to not only get the right type of guys on campus, but I had to navigate and figure out how to make a team, get a little bit better without having that additional time to be able to spend with them. And the first couple of years were a lot of just navigating and trying to figure things out and asking questions of a lot of really good college coaches that were willing to help me out. Ron Beachler from Ohio Northern was a huge help. Marty Nickel from Ithaca was a huge help. I asked a lot of questions of those guys, and it was a little bit more imposing than what I think I anticipated when I came into it, at the D3 level. So The first step was just getting kids on campus, of course, since we didn't have a team, and we were able to bring 26 kids in that first year. And then, we ballooned up into the 30s, pretty much ever since. But that first couple of years, we didn't have the right mix of kids. We had to kind of figure out what type of kid was going to fit best here at Otterbein. And I think, we've been able to do that because our retention has, been extremely high. Our GPA has shot up significantly since those first couple of years. But to be honest, I'm still learning, this process and still trying to navigate through it. And, we've been lucky to have some pretty good individuals while we've been here, but we have not been able to, put the top to bottom team together like I'd hoped to. I think we're on the verge of being able to, be more successful team wise with the kids we have in the room right now. But it's still a work in progress.
At the high school level, you also help to coach football and track.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on multi-sport athletes and being disciplined in other sports along with wrestling? And has it helped you as a coach at all to also understand the techniques and strategies of football and track?
Yeah, I absolutely love the football wrestling combination. I know some coaches just want their guys, wrestling, year round. Some football coaches, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, don't want their guys wrestling. They want them in the weight room during the winter, which usually those football coaches don't have a whole lot of success because they just don't get, the benefits that wrestling adds, to football and vice versa. I do have a few boys that have done both, since I've been here, and that's a hard undertaking at the college level, but I don't discourage it. It. I just want to see kids that compete, and when I'm recruiting, one of the first things I look for is, do they do other sports? Are they involved in other things? Um, there's a lot of burnout on guys that have done nothing but wrestle for since youth, and they haven't been able to experience other types of competition. I want a kid that's going to be able to step in and compete, and just understand what that is, not just on the wrestling level, but on multiple levels. So I really, really like that football wrestling combination. At Lexington, I had a soccer wrestling combination. A lot of my guys were soccer players, and they were extremely successful wrestlers, but also really good soccer players. Bailey Faust, who was a state runner up for me at 195, who was built like a tank, played soccer, and he was scary seeing him run down the soccer field. People had a tendency to get out of the way because you typically didn't see a soccer player that big that was that nimble. So I just really appreciate these kids that are willing to get outside their comfort zone a little bit and participate and compete in multiple sports. I think that's sadly something that's lacking with a lot of the athletes today. Luckily, I got my coaching start at a small farm school, and the only way to survive was to have athletes that played multiple sports. We had to have that, and I saw the benefit of that early, and I carried that with me, throughout my coaching career.
My last question for you today, Coach, is your first All-American was Drew Casper, who took fifth at the 2019 NCAA Division III championships.
Yeah.
He has since went on to become successful in the world of professional wrestling as the World Wrestling Entertainment's Brutus Creed.
Yeah.
Thoughts on what he did for the Otterbein wrestling community and his success beyond college?
Well, so he's probably my all-time favorite story because he actually started wrestling for me in second grade, Stephen. So he wrestled for me at Lexington. He and his brother Jacob, who is Julius Creed now, they're the tag team partners. They both started wrestling in my biddy, and Drew used to bring his Road Warrior action figures to biddy wrestling practice and tell me that was real wrestling, that what we did wasn't real wrestling. So this kid was telling me he was going to be a pro wrestler from the time he was in second grade. And, he wrestled for me. He was actually my last high school state champion at Lexington. He won the 182-pound state title for me in 2015, my last year that I was coaching there at Lex. And then he went to Indiana Tech after he graduated. But in October of that year, of his first year at Indiana Tech, I accepted the job here at Otterbein. And he called me right away and said, "Coach, I want to come back and I want to wrestle for you." So he left Indiana Tech, without wrestling, sat out that year, and then came to campus and wrestled for me here, for 4 years. Um, he was a kid that hated cutting weight. He was an undersized 182 pounder senior year in high school. Didn't like cutting weight. Got here, was a 197-pound national qualifier for us, but was weighing about 200 pounds and didn't want to cut 3 pounds anymore. So he said, "Hey, coach, I'm going to go to heavyweight next year." This was at the end of his sophomore year. I'm like, "Drew, you're 5'10", 200 pounds. How are you going to wrestle these big guys all year?" And he's like, "Coach, if I get up to 215, let me try and see what happens." So I was like, "All right, but if you get your butt kicked, you got to cut weight back down." And he came in weighing about 217 his junior year and didn't lose a match until the NCAA semifinals. So, he kind of proved me wrong on that one. And his brother kind of went through the same path, was a 182 pounder at Duke for his first 2 years. Was diagnosed with Crohn's, had a huge Crohn's flare up, and had to sit out and redshirt the year between his sophomore and junior year, and decided because of the Crohn's that he was going to make the jump to heavyweight. He was the second smallest heavyweight in the NCAA Division I tournament behind a dude named Kyle Snyder, and he ended up wrestling Snyder in the NCAA semifinals 2 years in a row. So he had a lot of success making the move to heavyweight as well, but he had about 4 inches of height on Drew, so it was a little bit easier transition. But Drew did a great job, and then he knew that at that point, after he was an All-American his junior year, that he had the opportunity to get a WWE contract, and a lot was going to be riding on how he did his senior year, in terms of how they were going to be able to develop his character. If he was a national champ, it would have been an easy transition to develop a character. So I think that was extra motivation for him his senior year. And outside of one match at the Pete Wilson, his semifinal match was kind of hairy. Every other match he wrestled, he was dominant his senior year. He was 30-0 going into the NCAA tournament. He was top seed, had pinned the kid from Wabash that I think was ranked number 3 in the regional final the 2 weeks before. And we had a meeting the night before. We were in Iowa. We had a meeting the night before the tournament started, and they told us, we're going to limit spectators. We're going to give you guys 6 bands. That's all spectators we're going to let in because of, this COVID thing that was starting to kind of spread. And no sooner, because Billy Schindel and I, Adrian's coach, were sitting next to each other, and we're like, "Hey, at least we get to wrestle." And, we were in the arena that was attached to the hotel. No sooner did we leave that meeting room, I rode the elevator up to our floor, and we all get a text that they canceled the tournament. Within less than 10 minutes of telling us, "Hey, we're going to wrestle, but we're going to limit spectators." So I had to go down to, Drew's room, and we had another freshman, Ryan Witten, who had qualified for the NCAA tournament too. And I had to tell both boys that it was canceled. So, it was devastating for Drew because Drew was banking on the fact that, he wins a national title and he gets a WWE contract. But not to be deterred, because they've been talking about this since second grade. He goes ahead and graduates from here, and he and his brother go down to Orlando and try out at the NXT training center. They get accepted. They spent a couple years in NXT, and then they made the main card of the WWE. And Drew always told me, because we always joke about it, he's going to be happy if he gets in the video game and he gets his own action figure. Then his wrestling career can be complete. And last year he was in the video game, and then 2 months ago Mattel announced their action figures, and now their action figures are out. So he's like, "Coach, it's complete at this point. So whatever happens, happens." But he's living a dream that he's had since second grade. And I talked to the guys about that. I don't want them all to be WWE wrestlers, but I want them to find something they're passionate about and chase after that. And he's become the poster child, for Otterbein wrestling for, a lot of different reasons, but most of all for that perseverance and that belief in himself. And I remember our guys used to, when he was in high school, before practice would start, they would do this thing where they'd run up the wall and try to do a backflip. Most of my guys that were good, they could do it. Even Faust, who was 195 pounds, he could run 5 steps up the wall and do a backflip. Drew would try to do it. He'd get 2 steps up the wall and land on his head. It's like he couldn't do a backflip. Now all of a sudden he's doing backflips off the top ring rope in the WWE and doing his Brutus ball, which is his finishing move. And, he had to do some training in gymnastics when he got to NXT, but by golly, now he's 280. If I would have had him as a 280-pound heavyweight here, that would have been amazing. But he's a tank now, and I'm just really proud of him because our relationship goes so far back, and and to see him doing what he always told me he was going to do. A lot of kids don't do that. That's been pretty special for me.
WWE schedules can be absolutely brutal.
Yep.
I don't know if you know this about me or not, but I was never at his level, not anywhere near his level, but I did professional wrestling for 6 years. And
Did not know that.
um, yeah, I did it for 6 years. And I was never that level. I was way lower level than him, but I knew guys. We worked with guys that were at that level
Yeah.
sometimes. And they literally, some of those guys were, I mean, they would work 315 out of 365 days a year, so they
Yeah.
had some brutal schedules. But along with his brutal schedule that he probably has now, does he ever come to any home duels anymore? Does he ever show up as alumni?
So he's been back to campus on a number of occasions. He has not been able to time it up to be back for a match yet, but he has been back. Talk to the team, see the team. Just visit with us. As coaches. I will say this: Drew is a homebody. He's married now, and I know that he wants to have kids, and he is not a fan of the constant travel. That's one of the things that I know that he doesn't like about it. So, he's had conversations about, going through another 3-year contract and then potentially making the jump to, coaching. I would absolutely love to be able to bring him back here and coach
That'd
with
be
me.
awesome.
I don't know if he'll ever leave Florida now. His wife's from Florida and that's where he's at now. But his mom and dad are still up here in Ohio, so I might be able to talk him into coming back someday. But I would love to be able to do that. But I know the travel kind of wears on them, and that is brutal. Their schedules are tough, and in the early days, when they were in NXT, they're having to go to the place that they're going to wrestle. They had to set up the ring. The wrestlers that were in NXT
Been
did
there,
all
done
the,
that. Yep.
set up the ring, had to do all the tear down after it was over with. It was like, it wasn't, the glamour and the glitz that a lot of people, which, it's not as glamorous as people think it is. Every time I see the kid, he's got massive bruises all over him. He's like,
Yeah.
Coach, they may not think it's real, but some of the stuff like really hurts. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's going to take its toll, but he's one of those kids that wants to, make sure that he still has the use of everything as he gets older. So I'll be interested to see how it all plays out. But I think he and Jacob both have done a pretty awesome job, and it's been fun to be able to watch him on TV, knowing that, Jacob was a 125-pound JV wrestler his freshman year for me in high school. And now
Wow.
the dude is, this massive, big, ripped, WWE wrestler that, also had an extremely successful, college wrestling career at heavyweight, which people look at me, he was a 125 pounder. They think that I'm nuts, but, and he was only 182 pounder senior year in high school as well. So it's like they both kind of followed this trajectory where, and I will say this, Jacob was probably the hardest working kid that I've ever had. He just did everything the right way and worked extremely hard. Drew thankfully had things come a little more naturally to him, and he was a little more loosey goosey with putting the work in. But still showed up, when it mattered the most. Two very different kids, personality wise and things. But it's just been fun to watch them, take this WWE track.
Coach, I want to say it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. I want to thank you for being a part of JT1 Wrestle, and we wish you guys the best of success this upcoming season, which is now less than 2 months away.
I know. I can't wait to get going, and I really appreciate you having me on, and we'll continue to follow all the stuff that you put out there.